Thanks so much. Great, yeah, so that is a little bit about my background. My research at Motorola mostly focuses on creating new services that increase the feeling of connection in strong tie social relationships. So I'll be giving some examples of that as I go through the talk and talk some more about methods here today. And then I've also been teaching this class at MIT that's gotten quite large. I have 112 in there, but it's actually up to 150 students this semester that are applying all these methods and doing a lot of what you're doing here in the app challenge. They're doing a generative study, they're coming up with an app, they're designing it, they're doing usability testing of it, they're actually then building it and evaluating it in use, all in the course of 12 weeks in the semester. So that's been going on now for the last 7 years. It's been a lot of fun to teach that. So the structure of the talk today, I'll give a little bit of background and motivation for why mobile research is different than other research and particularly web-focused technologies. I'll talk a bit about a mobile experience research model, and then give a couple case studies from research that I've done at Motorola Research over the past few years. So I want you to start by thinking of the world in 1995. Most of us can remember that. For some of the students, you might have been fairly young at that point. But if you wanted to call someone and you were out in the world, you found one of these, and you hoped that the person you were calling was at home or at work or someplace you could call them. There really wasn't a way to get in touch with someone when they were on the go. And this is only 1995. If you were lost, you went to a gas station and got a map or asked somebody how to get where you were going. You had no way to get navigation assistance while you were on the move, other than talking to someone or looking at a map. If you wanted to share a photo with someone, and you were lucky enough to have one of the early digital cameras, you had all these cables, and you had to connect it to a computer, and you probably didn't have email at this point. So then you'd print it and maybe mail it to someone that you wanted to share it with. Very complicated to do. And if you wanted to use a computer, you went to a lab like this, which is the Athena lab at MIT, where I spent a lot of time around that era, and you used a very fixed computer. And so a lot of the design and the development of computing applications were focused on settings like this, where you're at a big desk with a big computer. But if you think of today, if you want to call someone, no matter where you are, you take out your phone, and they have a phone wherever they are. If you're lost, you open up Google Maps, and it takes you where you're going, and it tells you exactly how to get there. If you want to share a photo, you have more ways than you know what to do with to share it on Android or on iPhone these days. And you can even share live everything you're seeing through your phone with anyone else in the world through services like BamBoozer that can live stream from a mobile phone to the web. And if you want to use a computer, you just open up your tablet and you have a pretty powerful computer there right in front of you that you can use anywhere you are. So mobile computing has really changed computing, which means it's changed the way we need to design systems for mobility. It's brought this anywhere, anytime voice and data connectivity. It's brought ubiquitous photo capture and video capture and sharing. And it's provided a lot of sensors. So now we can sense location, motion, temperature, altitude, all these things, and build contextually relevant services, which is very different from an app that you just sit down and use at a computer for a fixed task. These are now things that can be proactive and can notify you instead of you sitting down and explicitly choosing to interact with something. So computing is now out in the world, and it's not easily studied in the lab like previous computing technologies were. And this fits with the 3 waves of human-computer interaction. So when human-computer interaction research really started in the 1980s, it came from psychology and human factors. And it was really focused on what could people do physically with a computer. How could they move a mouse? How quickly could they type? How quickly could they interact with the service to get done the task they needed to get done? And in the 90s, that focus on tasks and usability really expanded, where the focus of HCI then was really on efficiency. So how quickly could you do something on a computer? How did you get confused? How efficient was that navigation? And that was mostly in controlled lab experiments, very much like psychology lab experiments, sitting in a lab, doing a task. The aim of HCI is really focused on making things that are compelling and engaging, things that people actually can use in the real world and fit into their daily lives, so things they actually want to use, where previous research was focused on efficiently doing something whether they wanted to or not. And so the research questions that we're answering in mobile human-computer interaction research are, how can these new pervasive media devices enable new ways to strengthen strong tie social relationships? How can we understand how these services are adopted and integrated into everyday life? And what methods should we use to do this? And so this talk will talk about some of these methods and our overall research philosophy, where we learn from people, build concepts quickly, and get them in the field for long-term use as quickly as possible. And that's very important for mobile, is getting it out there so people can actually try it in their everyday lives and not just a paper prototype on a desk, because all of the aspects of someone's context will not come into play if they're just trying something in a fixed lab setting. So a typical project for us in our research lab at Motorola, or for the class that I teach at MIT, starts with some generative research, so choosing a domain of interest, conducting some field work in that domain, using that to come up with new concepts. Usually we come up with 100 to 200 new concepts from any given study that we do. Building those out very, very quickly, sometimes in days or over a week, getting the concept built and getting it in people's hands to use in their daily lives for weeks or months at a time, to see how it integrates into their practices, to see how they use it in everyday life. Rapidly iterate on that, and then take successful concepts forward to market. So the examples that I'll be giving later will follow this research model. And so in the generative methods, in trying to understand what applications you should build, you should understand that the use of mobile technology is place-based. So it's about understanding where people are, how they're interacting with the technology, how they need to interact with other people and other services and other information out in the world. And this use happens very opportunistically and sporadically. So it's not like you can just do a standard ethnographic method of observing someone and seeing how they interact with a particular service, because they're going to just bring it out, use it for a couple seconds, and put it away at various random points throughout their daily lives. So you really need to augment direct observation with some kind of instrumentation of what they're actually doing, or some kind of diary method where they can report what they're actually doing throughout their daily life. So for generative methods, we often do home tours or environment tours to see the kinds of places where they interact with these services. We do contextual inquiry, which is having them perform tasks for us in the context of normal use. So if we're interested in making a new music application, we find out where they play music on their phone. We take them there. We have them go through the task of playing music for that setting that they're in. We have people do diary studies, which is basically just telling us when they do something we're interested in. So if we're studying mobile photo sharing, we say, hey, every time you share a photo, let us know. Give us a phone call, leave us a voicemail, or write us an email and tell us about that. Where were you? What were you doing? What photo did you take? Who did you share it with? Why? So we can understand what they're doing today and use that to inspire new applications. We also do a lot of content analysis, looking at content that they play or share and understanding the characteristics of that were important. And the goal is, if you understand the current use, that can help you inspire new designs based on that data. So often we start one of these generative studies with an initial interview. We'll ask some questions about our domain of interest. We'll have some data collection period, which is the diary part of the study, where we'll either monitor something they're doing on the phone, or have them call into a voicemail or send us an SMS when they do something we're interested in. And then have a final interview to follow up on that data that we got in the diaries and the logs. We get a lot of data from this. This right here is one of our biggest affinity analysis. We had over 2,800 notes, I think, from the study that we did. And when it was done, they look like this, where we have them all nicely grouped and have themes that emerge from the data. And then if you look at this wall, every orange note here is a design idea, a new application or service that we were inspired to create based on the data that we were able to collect. And I'll give you some examples of these in a few minutes. So after we get those hundreds of design ideas and prioritize them and figure out what we want to build them really, really quickly. Usually in a weekend or a week, we can build some of these concepts enough that we can test them out in real-world situations and start to use them. Sometimes start to use them ourselves and then give them to other folks to start to use. But we want a ready-to-field implementation within days. So it's really important to build only what you need to test that new experience. You don't have to build out all the settings and all the bells and whistles just to see if some new experience will work in daily life. And then we evaluate them in realistic situations. So we give them to people to use on their primary cell phones with their real social networks. We get a diversity of participants, so we can understand how young and old, educated and not, employed, unemployed, every different type of person we can imagine will use this service. And when we start to notice similarities in use across those very diverse people, that's where we can start to say we're onto something. If a broad section of people find a new service useful, that's probably something we want to take forward. Otherwise, we have no problem killing it, and we kill stuff all the time. You know, if we start a generative project, we come up with 100 ideas, we might build 5 of them. One of those we might take forward to public beta. You know, maybe of every public beta we do, maybe 1 out of 5 of those goes into a product. So we're very happy to kill things, and by doing it quickly, we mitigate risk, and we can just do it fast, stop it if it doesn't show that it will be successful. So once we've built it, how do we evaluate it? We usually have research questions about adoption and sustained use. So will people continually use a service that we come up with, and does it fit into their daily lives? Does it really change their lives in some meaningful way? Does it bring joy to situations in their daily life? Does it help connect them with their family members or friends in new and meaningful ways? And so usually to do this, we do a 3 or 4, or sometimes 3 or 4 week study, sometimes several months. We have them call into a phone number and do a voicemail whenever they use the app or get some significant experience out of using it. And we usually have some semi-structured interviews at the end to ask them more questions based on those diary logs that they've left us. And we always instrument our apps, so we know every click they make, every interaction they have with the app, so we can really understand how they're engaging with it. And so we combine those qualitative techniques, all the data from the voicemails and the interviews, with the quantitative data. So how they used a service. This graph, every column is a user, and this is how they used a variety of different features of this application over 90 days. So you can really dig into that data and understand which features were used, different types of users that you have, and you can use this then in your interviews to ask people about particular patterns of use that they had. So that's a bit about the methods and how we approach that. And now I want to just get into some examples, because this is where it gets interesting and you can see how you can actually apply this to certain domains of interest. So I'll quickly talk through the first 3 and then talk about the last one in a little more detail. So this goes back to 2002, 2003. We really wanted to understand how people took and shared photos, how they organized them, what they put on the display in their homes. We did some home tours, some interviews, and then we had them keep a diary of the photos they shared over 3 or 4 weeks. And those were the methods we used to understand this. This was just before camera phones hit the market, so we realized that it would be really important to understand photo sharing behavior to design really compelling photo sharing applications. And what did we learn? We learned that time, location, people in the photos, and usage history were key ways that people think about their media. And this is really important, because if you have 10,000 photos on your phone and you need to find them, you need them tagged in some way to be able to find those. And these are things we could tag mostly automatically with new applications that we could build. We also saw that the aspects of photos that people remember are varying. So some photos you might remember the year, some photos you might remember who sent it to you, but there's never really anything very consistent about what you remember about a given photo that you're trying to find. And we saw that sharing photos really provides a view into other people's lives for events that are otherwise unseen, right? You know, sharing vacation photos, sharing photos of certain things you do in your life are a way to see into other people's lives, which we thought was really interesting. So we built out some concepts. The first one we built was this media finder that would automatically apply location tags, time tags, face detection, and you could use natural language to query it. So you could say, you know, show me pictures of Frank from the last 2 weeks, and boom, it would show you photos. Even beyond the kinds of things Siri is doing today, you know, to really dig into your photos and search in interesting ways. And we built the first map-based interface to find photos as well, based on this, where you could zoom into the map and you could find photos that were taken at those locations. And then we built some public betas and products out of that. So we worked with some folks at Yahoo to make this app called Zone Tag. And this was in about 2005 or 2006. And it allowed you to use the cell tower that your phone was connected to location tag your photos. And this was before GPS was in mobile phones, but your cell tower would tell you, we called it zip code level accuracy, about where you are. So it can tag it with the city and state for sure, which is often all you really need to go find it later. So with 2 clicks, you could upload an image that you took on your phone to Yahoo with the tags, to Flickr with the tags of the location, and then it would show you some suggested tags of things nearby based on Yahoo's local database of venues nearby. We also built this system called the Media Finder that we shipped in over 150 million phones that we made, where you could find photos by date, by location, and by some aspects of usage history as well. And that came directly from the research that we did. If we didn't do that research, we wouldn't have come up with these particular products that we made in the end. One of the other domains we looked at was music. So we did some generative research looking at how context affects music selection. So we went into people's homes, we asked them to perform music selection tasks for us. This was when most people still had physical collections of music before everything really moved over to digital and streaming music. But we wanted to learn what music they select for particular occasions and particular events in their daily lives. And then we did a contextual inquiry, both in the home and the car, where we observed them finding music for these tasks. And we saw that music selection was often a satisficing behavior, which means you go through a few choices until you find something that's good enough, and then you stop. And so we saw people, playing music on random, and they'd be like, no, too fast, too slow, too old, too new, yeah, okay, this is fine. And then they'd stop and listen to that song that came on. We also saw that music is deeply connected to the events in people's lives. We asked someone to describe a CD, and we just picked a random CD out of their pile and gave it to them. And they were like, this CD is fall nights, cool fall nights, sitting on the porch in my Nike sweatshirt with my sister talking about boys. And that is what that CD meant to her, because they used to play it all the time one fall when they used to sit outside. And so that music is deeply connected to their events and memories in their lives. So we built a few concepts out of this. One was what we call the metadata knob, or the music dial. And the idea is you can just dial in music on a particular attribute. So if you want music that's newer, you just turn it up. If you want music that's older, you turn it down. You could also associate the knob with the speed of the music. And you can get faster music or slower music just by turning it up and down. So you don't have to navigate big, long lists of 10,000 songs to find what you're looking for. You can just dial into those aspects that you're satisficing on. We built this other one in the middle called the ambient memory player. And it would show you photos from your collection taken around the time when that music was popular, or the time when you added that music to your collection. So events that might be around that same time period in your mind. And they just show up ambiently as you were playing your music. And you could ignore it if you wanted to, or you could engage with it. And we built another concept called the play tree, where instead of just randomly going from song to song, it gave you a choice of several songs that were related to the currently playing song. So maybe one by the same artist, one in the same genre, one from the same album. And if you wanted, it would just play on random and select the first one all the time. But with one quick button click, you could steer the playlist a bit towards what you wanted to listen to at the time. Again, without having to go navigate all these menus, which on a mobile device is fairly difficult. And then the last one I want to talk about before I go into the larger case study is ambient communications. So this takes this photo and music sharing that I talked about earlier. We also looked at location sharing in phone calls. So we had people record their phone calls for us with the permission of everyone involved. And we listened to how they talked about location with each other, because we were interested in why people currently share location today and what they do with that information once they have it. So we coded all those phone calls for instances of location disclosure. And one of the things we found from that was that people often know about people in close social relationships know about where the other person is, but they don't know the exact transition times. So I might not call someone I know very well because I think they might have just gotten to work. But maybe they're still on the way and I could call them. So we built this system called Motion Presence. And it's your normal contact list, but next to the person's name, it tells you if they're moving between places or not moving, if they're at a place. But it won't share the actual place where they are because that's stalking and tracking, things people don't like. But we thought, what could we do? What could people do if they just knew that people were moving between places or out of place, and how many minutes they were in that state? And when we fielded this, we saw that people could do really interesting things. They could determine how much time it would take for them to get to their current location. So if I'm meeting up with a friend, I know it takes them 20 minutes to get there. They just left 5 minutes ago. They've only been moving for 5 minutes. I know I have 15 minutes before they show up. So maybe I go get a coffee, or maybe I go do something else for 15 minutes. People also used it for availability, so knowing if they should call someone, if they were on their way. They used it for all these coordination tasks, which we thought was really fascinating. We also built a music presence app that would show you the artist and album that your friends were playing, like Last.fm does today. And we built a photo presence app that is fairly similar to what Facebook does today, with giving you a feed of photos and comments on photos from your friends that you can see in real time as they're taking them. And so the findings from this, we saw that this shared content and context really creates feelings of connection over a distance. And people can make a lot of inferences based on the context. Like I said, that someone's 15 minutes away, or that someone's busy, or that someone's available for communication. We call this ambient micro-coordination. So just in the background, you're able to coordinate with someone without even explicitly communicating with them. And micro-coordination is sort of all the calls and text messages you have to send back and forth to someone to plan and meet up. And we showed that you could actually get a lot of that done without all that kind of annoying explicit communication back and forth. And we built a product called MotoBLUR on this, which was the key differentiator on Motorola's Android phones for a number of years. And it basically aggregated all your social network information together into one place on the phone. So you didn't have to go open Facebook and open Twitter and open Flickr and open all these apps just to see what someone was doing. You could go in the phone book. And in that person's phone book entry, you could see all their updates from across all these different services. So the phone book became the place to go to learn about your friends and to aggregate all that information from all these sources together. So the case study that I wanted to go into a little bit more detail that will finish up this talk is looking at intergenerational communication over a distance. And I'll talk about our field study, the concept we made, the field study of that concept, and then the public beta that we put online based on that. So why were we looking at intergenerational communication? The population is aging. As we all know, we have about 20% of the population either now or soon to be at an age of retirement. And the population is becoming more distributed. So 43% of Americans live more than an hour away from their parents right now. So that's because parents are moving away to retirement destinations, children are moving away for jobs. So we have this problem of an aging and distributed population and a clear need to develop experiences that bring family together over that distance. So we wanted to understand, what do people do today? How do people communicate across distance and generation? What tools they use, what challenges they face, what tensions arise. Differences between communication at a distance versus when they're together, and any artifacts they have in the home that help them remember that other person. So we designed a study where we had some initial in-person interviews, some diary logging, where anytime they communicated, we asked them to call into a voicemail. We asked them to take some photos of the places where they communicated, or any artifacts of communication, any letters that were sent, cards, things like that. And then we had some final in-person interviews to clarify those log entries, and performed an affinity analysis of all that qualitative data that generated, I think, about 150 different design ideas of things that we could build. We recruited 10 people to do this, parents who lived down in Central Florida and their adult children who lived up in the Chicago area. So that's about 1,000 miles apart. And we used a professional recruiting agency so we could get a very diverse set of people. And so what did we learn? We saw this importance of the family and this kind of ideal family state, remembering these big events in the family and reminiscing about this. And this is something that people did repeatedly on their phone calls. They'd talk about a wedding or a trip or a time when the whole family got together. They talked about times they did things together when they visited. And they talked about family history. And this is a quote I'll come back to when we come to the design idea. One of the participants was walking by a theater in Chicago, and she remembered that that was the place that her grandfather used to dance when he was on military leave. And so she took a photo of it, and she sent it to her mom with a subject line of where Pops used to dance. And so by walking down the street, she saw something that had family importance, was inspired by that to create a communication with her mom. And we thought that was really special and something we could build on when we came to building the system. We also saw that people like to communicate out in the world, in their daily lives. For the most part, people didn't just sit around and wait for the phone to ring and sit at home and make phone calls. They called with other activities, when they were walking, when they were at the gym, from anywhere where they were. And that people like to communicate from comfortable spaces. They might have a couch or someplace where they like to sit and write letters or sit and Skype with family members. And we also saw that for people who have these fixed communication spaces, it really impedes the communication that they're able to have. This one participant, he only had one home phone that hung on the wall with a cord. And we asked him where he communicates, and he said, "You mean where the phone hangs on the wall?" And for him, that's the only way he could really communicate, which really limited what he could do. We saw limitations in video conferencing as well. A lot of the older adults, if they had a computer, it was often in a side office room or in a basement or someplace really out of the way. So it was really uncomfortable and a special event to go fire it up and start video communication. It wasn't something that really fit into their daily lives. And then we saw how learning these stories of daily life, just the little things you do every day, creates this feeling of connection over distance. Seeing a new dog, Skyping into a kid's birthday party, just being present at these events and learning these little stories that build up over time, create a feeling of togetherness, even though you're still at a distance. So we created some design implications for systems we could build based on all this data we saw. We wanted to design a system that evoked family history in these shared memories, a system that could integrate communication into everyday life, and build something that could recreate these feelings of being together. And we returned back to this quote because we were really, really struck by what this participant did with this photo that she took. And said, let's use that as inspiration with these design implications to make a system. And the system we built was called Serendipitous Family Stories. And the idea was parents or grandparents can record a video clip telling a story about some part of their lives growing up. And they could save those on a map to the place where they occurred. This was a participant who saved a story about meeting her husband, her future husband, while walking across the Michigan Avenue Bridge back in the 30s, I think. And her heel broke off, and this sailor came by and picked her up and carried her to the bus. And years later, that became her husband, and they got married. And so she recorded that story and left it on the Michigan Avenue Bridge. And then she shared that with her kids or her grandkids who were in the study. And when they walked by that spot, their phone would start vibrating. And that video from their grandma would be there. And they could watch it in the context of where it really happened. So you're walking across the Michigan Avenue Bridge, your phone starts vibrating, you open it up, you hit a button, and there's grandma telling you a story about her life there and what happened to her in that spot in the world. So that's the basic system. We built this very simple web interface. We made this in an afternoon, I think. It's a Google map. It's a little flash thing to record a video. You pick the spot where you want to put the story. You can set a radius of how close someone has to get to that point to actually unlock the story and get it. You record a video, you stop it when you're done, and that's it. You have a story, and it's shared with your kids and grandkids. We built a very simple mobile app, again, something we put together in a weekend, I think, where you could see the story, it would play the video. When the video is done, it would take you to a screen where you could call or text message the creator, or you could just hit a little like button that shoots them an email that says that you found this specific video and you liked it. And that was the mobile app. Pretty simple. So we ran a field study of this. We got 10 parents and grandparents down in Florida who were retired down there, who grew up in Chicago, and 10 of their adult children and grandchildren up in Chicago. We met with the older adults down in Florida. We had them record a bunch of videos about their lives growing up, save them to the map. And then during the study, we asked them to call us if their kids or grandkids ever talked about any of these. And that was their whole involvement in the study. We met with the kids and grandkids. We put the app on their phones, and they used it for a month in their daily lives. So if they ever came across one of these locations, it would go off and they could watch the video. There was also this little compass interface in the app where if you opened it up, it would tell you the nearest story you haven't found yet is 2 miles that way, and you could go walk over and find it if you wanted to. We had voicemail diaries from them as well, and a final interview at the end. So what did people talk about in the stories? So they talked about family outings. They talked about holiday events, neighborhood events growing up. They talked a lot about their dating lives, which was kind of interesting to share with your grandkids. Things that they probably didn't talk about with their grandkids outside the context of this system. And they talked about work, old offices they worked at, colleagues they used to work with, and things that happened there. During the course of the month, 83% of the stories were found. So most of the stories that were made were actually found during the study. People talked about this, finding it as a cute little treat and something that makes you happy and brings a smile to your face. It surprised people. They weren't trying to find a story, but their phone would just go off walking around the city, and they'd get this story in that spot. One of the participants told us, I was walking down the street and Grandma popped up and told me a story. And that's how it really felt to use the system. Grandma was just popping up, and because it was video, it seemed like they were telling it to you live. It seemed like they were right there in front of you, which was a really interesting experience for people. This brought about really strong memories and emotions. So some of the stories, especially some of the ones about meeting significant others for the first time, or things like that, they made people cry. They were really touched by them. Some were really funny, and they laughed about them together. But it really brought out these strong memories and emotions because it was such a close family member telling the story. They were able to see the family in a new way as well. One of the participants, she didn't know that her grandma grew up without a car in Chicago. And she has a car, and she drives her car a lot. And she's like, how did Grandma ever get around? Like, they took a bus or a train, and she just couldn't imagine, getting around the city that way. Called her grandma and talked to her about that. One of the other participants, this was a really interesting one. She didn't know that her grandma, in this case, was actually a junior executive at a department store. By the time she was born, her grandma had retired, and she always just heard that her grandma worked at this department store. Always just thought she was a sales clerk there. But she was actually in the management track there. And she called her grandma afterwards and said, Grandma, I had no idea. And they had this long, hour-long conversation about the role of women in big corporations and what it was like in the 50s to be in that position. And they had this wonderful conversation with each other just because her grandma made a little story there and talked about something from her work. It also enabled people to engage with the city in new ways, being places where things happened in family history, learning about things like Riverview Park that a lot of the younger people in the study didn't know about, this amusement park up at Belmont and Western that was torn down in the 60s or 70s. And this one person was going down on the bus, got this story, and actually called her grandma and said, Grandma, you put it in the wrong spot. There's no amusement park here. And then they had this long history about how that used to be a big amusement park. Everyone in the city went there. Everyone was so sad when it closed. And they had this great conversation about how the city used to be different than it is today. So from this evaluation, we said, well, we're really onto something here. People are really engaging in this system. It's really connecting them to their family members over a distance. And we wanted to turn this into a public beta. So we had to get beyond that simple interface we hacked together in a weekend and make something that could actually work for people in their daily lives, would have the right kind of access control and permissions and security that we would need for a system that would be released publicly. And we were interested in how this would be used in the wild. You know, how would people create stories? Where would they put them? What would they talk about when we have thousands of users instead of just the 10 in the study? So we built a system called storyplace.me, and this is the nice new version of it. So the mobile app, as you can see, is much more polished. That little compass interface to find stories is much nicer looking now. You can make stories now on the mobile, not just on the website. This is one my intern made for me on a boat on the lake. And there's like 10 feet of grass here where you can actually get the story on land. And I tried to hunt down this story for like a whole weekend. Because at first I thought I might get it up here, and it's just too short of Navy Pier to actually get it over there. But so you can do fun things. You can play around with this as well when you make the stories. And we saw some new opportunities. So in the study, it was very focused, right? We met with the parents, we met with the grandparents. They made stories for each other. It was very simple. But when you put something out in the market, you won't have that other person there making stories for you right away. So we wanted to have some content in there that people could get before anyone was sharing stuff with them. So we partnered with WTTW, the city of Chicago, WNET in New York, which is their public media station. And we got them all to put clips from their documentaries into the system. So here's one from Jeffrey Baer, who makes all these really great documentaries about Chicago. And it's 25 clips about things on the Chicago lakefront. There's really some nice ones around here, too. And so you can find them and get these content items, even if no one's explicitly made content for you in the system. And now we have a lot of content in there, right? And we made it so anyone could make a public collection of content like the ones from public media stations. So we kind of had to change the way that you got stories. And we've adopted a Twitter model where you can decide to explicitly follow or unfollow particular collections of stories, and then you get notified about those. And there's a screen in the app where you can see collections nearby and decide what you want to follow or what you don't want to follow. Just so you're not getting bombarded with things that people made in the system. And so it'll only notify you for things you're following or things that friends explicitly shared. And so these are things we didn't even have to think about when we made that quick public beta, or the quick private beta that we did the study on. And we put it in the Android market, so anyone could go on and use the web interface, or they didn't have to have an Android phone to use that. And then we made the Android app to use to get stories. So your grandma could still make a story for you, even if she doesn't have a smartphone. She could just go on the web and do that, and then you could get it on your Android phone when you go near one of those places. And we started studying the places where content was created. One of the research interests I have is the places where people use different mobile applications and how those relate to important places in the city. Last summer, we ran the Milgram Map Study, where people draw a map of their city and what's important to them in the city. And what we found from that study is those are not the kinds of places where people use systems like Foursquare. So the important places to you in the city, for most people, tend to be museums and parks and outdoor spots, places where you might have these big family memories and history and things that happened there. The places that you use Foursquare are the coffee shop and the bar and the restaurant, places you might go to a lot but don't really hold a lot of personal significance in your life. What we've seen from the data from storyplace.me is the places people are making stories are the same types of places they draw on their maps. So they're places that really hold some importance in their lives. And you can really understand what places are important to people based on the places where they're making stories, which is really, really interesting to us. So just as a summary, thinking about the methods that I talked about today, for mobile research, it's really important to understand current use, both qualitatively and quantitatively, and that current use is out in the world. It's not something that you can really observe in a lab. You can't have someone come in and show you how they do something like you might do on a computer, because the use is very contextual as to where they are and what they're doing. It's important to generate a lot of concepts from that data, prioritize them, and quickly build them, and see how people use them in daily life. Because again, just evaluating something in a lab, it might help you get through some of the usability issues, and that's very important. but actually seeing how someone adopts it and uses it in their daily life will tell you if you're really onto something. Beyond just making something that's usable, making something that's actually useful for people. And then learning from those field evaluations to rapidly improve or kill a concept if it doesn't prove viable. So I want to thank a whole lot of people, both at Motorola and MIT, that have helped with this research and the thinking that's been involved in this whole research method. And I'm happy to take questions. Yeah.
So on this platform, let's say I'm in a place that I have a story about. Can I take a video there?
Yes.
Okay. On
So,
like using FaceTime or something like that?
Well, so in the app itself, you can record a video and make a story wherever you are. So if I'm here and I want to make a little story about this talk, I could open up the app, just start recording video, give it a little voiceover and stop it, and then share it with anybody I want who comes near this building. And you can define the radius of how close someone needs to get to that point. One of the other interesting findings that we've had through all of this research is people's concept of a location isn't a point. You know, it's not like the venue you check into on Foursquare, this exact latitude and longitude coordinate. I might have a story about Hyde Park, or I might have a story about the university, and it really doesn't matter where someone is in the university. So I could set a larger radius on that story, and then whenever one of my friends comes near the university, they can get that story.
You talked a lot about the importance of context.
Mm-hmm.
And what other trends do you see emerging which will play a huge role if the app becomes adapted and successful in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think understanding context is extremely important. And a lot of the early apps just did very simple things with context. So, you know, they used the location to optimize a list, right? What are the restaurants nearby in Yelp? What are the movie theaters nearby in Flickster or something like that, right? But I think going forward, it's really understanding that context at a much deeper level, starting to understand patterns over time. And Foursquare is starting to do this a little bit, where it recognizes your routines. And so if you're always checking into a coffee shop in the morning, it'll rank that higher because it knows in the morning that's where you go. And if you go to that same location later, it'll sort the results differently. So I think deeply understanding context, where context is location, application usage, communication patterns, will really help these applications in the future to show you what's relevant. Because the amount of mobile content and just web shared content is increasing so quickly. You know, if you think of your whole Facebook feed and everything that's there, there are certain things that might be very contextually relevant to you. So understanding those patterns over time will be really important.
I'm curious about the teams that you use at Motorola.
Yeah.
Do you have 100% programmers, or is it 50-50 designers and technical programmers?
So yeah, so everyone in research at Motorola is multidisciplinary in themselves. So I do a lot of the implementation, I do a lot of the field studies and research. I kind of have a background in some anthropological methods as well as computer science and some machine learning stuff as well. And so we all play multiple roles on all the projects. We do have a couple dedicated anthropologists. We have a few people who mostly do implementation, but we found that the best teams to do this kind of research, because it all happens so fast, right? We go from the research to the concept to the design to the implementation in weeks. We don't want to constantly be turning it on and off to new teams. We want to have a consistent team that can take it through the whole process. That's really important when we hire people. We look for these cross-disciplinary people. Yeah.
So I noticed on one of your slides you said there was an issue with when people were on the L.
Oh, yeah.
They were getting bombarded with. How did you guys end up resolving that?
So we did resolve that. So one of the problems in the initial app was if you had a radius in the story. So maybe I'll explain one more bit of how the app works. If you were getting near the spot of the story, it would vibrate and say you're getting close. And you could then map your way to get to the actual spot where you could watch the story. Because some people set these really tiny radiuses, and you would never find it if you didn't have a little bit of help. So someone was on the L, and they were going past one of the story locations. And they weren't close enough to get the story, but they were close enough to get the notification that they were getting near it. But because they were on the L, they had no way to actually go over them. So every day they were getting this notification both ways to and from work. You're getting your story. And they were so upset at us. Because they're like, every day you're bugging me and I can't go get this story. So what we did in the public beta version of the app that we put online was that if you got a notification for a story, you could mute future notifications. So if you just long pressed on it, it would let you mute it, and then you wouldn't be notified of that again until you actually got to where you could view the story. So it wouldn't give you the nearby one. And that seems to have worked for people. Because in general, there's maybe one or two of these annoying ones that you're just not close enough to. You can't actually walk over again.
You said that people with iPhones could get to this through the web interface?
Oh, well, anyone can make a story on the web. But in order to get the actual content, you need to have an Android phone. And that's, I work for Motorola that's owned by Google, and they don't want us making iPhone apps. But, you know, we could at some point have an iPhone app if we wanted to make a serious product out of this. It was, you know, kind of a research public beta that we put out there. But, you know, you would want an iPhone app eventually if you were serious about it.
For educational use, could you see that instead of, let's say, family members or friends, that you could have class?
Yes, and I've actually talked to a couple education conferences about the system, and we have student groups using it in various parts of the country where you can go on a field trip. Let's say you're going down to Springfield and there's certain sites you go to. You could actually get the video content telling you about the places you are as you go to those different locations. A lot of the public content we have in from, you know, WTTW and WNET can really support that and give you the history of the places you go. You know, you walk down to Jackson Park, you can learn all about the World's Fair.
What point did you guys decide that you want to monetize this, and what are some of the strategies you thought about monetizing?
Yeah, so it kind of varies for everything that we have commercialized from research. Some of the things, there's a product team that's kind of interested in the space that we're working in. We're constantly presenting the research that we're doing to various product teams all over the company. So if someone gets really excited and they have a way to take it forward, we work with them to turn it into a real proper product. Sometimes we can create a whole new business team out of something that we've done, and then we just build a new team around it and they continue to take it forward. It really depends on what we're working on. And this sort of happened at a bad time when Google was taking over and some things were changing, so it didn't actually go to something that was monetized in a big commercial product, you know, advertised all over it. But we were still able to get a lot of good research data out of it.
So I had two questions. One is, do you see any like trends and stories emerging? Like, are people going places to maybe like challenge people to have some experience there, or are they just like relating their own experiences? And two, do you guys see any kind of integration happening with like Google Glasses or something like that?
So the first one about the different experiences, there's one of the great stories that was in our pilot study. One of the older adults, their grandparents, told his grandson to go to this church. Well, when they were near the church, they got the story that basically took them on an adventure around the church and said, you know, go out to the garden and look behind this bush, and there's a little plaque to your great-grandfather there, and then go inside and look at the organ, and this organ was a donation by this other family member, and they basically took them on this little experience walking around different parts of the church. And there were a few stories that were like that, where they wanted someone to go someplace and actually do something. And it's not really just like, here's what happened here. It's like, go experience the different parts of this place, which was really neat. And the second question?
The second question is, do you see any like integration occurring
with
down
the
with
Google,
Google?
yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, you could see with glasses and with other systems like that give you contextually relevant information. These are some things you might want to have access to in that. And it would be even less distracting than kind of having to take your phone out and look at it. You can just see it right in front of you. So there are a lot of interesting contextually relevant services you can build in if you have a display and all the contextual senses available on something that you're wearing. wearables is a whole other fascinating mobile research area that nobody's quite figured out yet, but where there's a lot of promise.
Did you patent the research?
Yes. So we patent everything we do. So Motorola has always been very, very big on patenting, which is why we got bought by Google. And so yeah, we have a couple patents on the system. Most of the stuff that I talked about today, we have various patents on. And it's important to do that early on when you get the idea, before you're out there fielding it and people are using it. All it takes is one person to blog about something that you've given them to use, and now you've lost the ability to patent it in some places, in some countries. Yeah.
So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what the fidelity is between the diary stuff you ask people to self-report and the diary stuff you instrument.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter.
Yeah, so we instrument most of the apps to collect pretty much every click of what they're doing and timestamps on when they're doing that. And then we also have them call us and give us qualitative data on the experience that they had using the system. And there are generally two very different things we can learn, right? So we can learn what features they use the most, but that doesn't really tell us why they're using them or how the service is compelling. It's the voicemails that they give us that really let us dive into why something was useful. So we see some trends in the quantitative data, and then we look to the qualitative data to explain why it's there and to come up with new design solutions, right? We can see from the quantitative data this feature was never used or very rarely used, but we don't really understand why until we go to the qualitative data, and then somebody says, oh, this was really annoying and I stopped using it, or whatever reason they have for not doing that. Or if only this did that, this would be so much more useful. And we make it do that, right? But you need the qualitative data that really explains why people are using something in a certain way. I mean, some folks at Google might disagree, and they're blind A/B testing of millions of different things. And whatever tests better is what they do, and they just do all these modifications to their interfaces, 10,000 times a day. And there's 10,000 different versions of Gmail out there that everyone's using that are all slightly different. And they're constantly testing. If we make this bigger, if we move this here, if we change that color, will people use this longer? Will they click on more links? And for a lot of that, they don't care why. And maybe there is no perceptible why. Just you clicked on it because it was there. And if you ask someone, why did you click that versus why didn't you click it in this slightly other different version of the interface, people might not even be able to state why they made that decision. It was just subconscious. So there is some value to the purely quantitative stuff, especially when you're trying to do things like that. But for things that people are actually aware of, like what did you get out of finding the story? Why did you start a communication? How are you now closer to your other family member by using this application? Those are things you can really only get out of the qualitative data.
Great. Well, let's give Frank another hand and